Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for a story tonight, because I just love stories. I'm passionate about stories. I don't think there's anything nicer in this entire world than a beautiful story, and have I got a lovely story for you tonight. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Kim had absolutely no idea that it would be so daunting and overwhelming to arrive in the all-consuming university town of Boston, bustling with a spirited activity and a youthful, vibrant energy. But after having not heard from her boyfriend, Ethan Hansen, for over a month, she had left her quaint rural North Carolina town to seek him out, as he was a student at BU, Boston University. Ostensibly her impulsive actions had been against the salient advice of her father, whom had told her in no uncertain terms that running after her boyfriend was a bad idea. "It makes you look desperate and needy," he had told her obsequiously, begging her not to go. But Kim, being resolutely stubborn by nature, would not listen to his sagacious advice. "It robs you of your dignity and your self-respect, and will likely make Ethan lose interest in you fast. Men don't like being chased by women. They've always liked to do the chasing. Give him his space, and in time he will soon realize that you're the very best thing that has ever happened to him. Because believe me, Kim, you most certainly are. You must remember, my love, that at university he will be around a lot of young ladies, and for a while it might overwhelm him a little. But once he comes to his senses, which he surely will, he will realize that nothing beats his beloved hometown girl." "What are you saying, Dad?" asked Kim, looking at her father aghast, as if he was speaking a diabolical foreign language that should never be articulated. "Are you suggesting that Ethan is frolicking around with other girls? He's not like that, Dad. He loves me. He'd never ever cheat on me. He told me as much," she said defiantly, bashing the back of her boiled egg angrily with her spoon. Mr. Carter Barron looked very uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly in his seat, and frenziedly he began buttering his toast. He glanced briefly at his wife pleadingly, through his black-rimmed spectacles that framed his kind, steely grey eyes, as if begging her surreptitiously to get him out of the uncomfortable hole he dug for himself. The Carter Barron family had been sitting around the breakfast table, enjoying a hearty breakfast, as they did traditionally every Sunday morning, as a matter of routine. Mrs. Carter Barron had some old-school ideas about raising her family that were swaddled deeply in tradition, and Sunday morning family breakfasts went back with her family for many generations, and she had absolutely no intention of dismantling these old habits that were to her incredibly precious. It was early November, and the cold, icy weather of the forthcoming winter was making its presence known. It had swept over their North Carolina town with a vengeance over the last week, with its icy fingers that insisted on suffocating everything it touched in an oppressive chill. When you glanced out of the Carter Barrons' old colonial farmhouse that had been in the family since the 1800s, you could see that their once resplendent verdant grass had taken on a rather weary, fatigued, stone-washed look, and many of the bedraggled-looking trees had shed their golden red leafy finery, like garments of old autumn clothes that needed to be discarded, for they had served their purpose. It would seem their stripped naked boughs were swinging in the still breeze, as if waiting for their shameful immodesty to be covered in garlands of white snow. Everything looked tired, sad, melancholic, and defeated by the icy invasion of the cruel weather, so intent on hijacking all that was green. but thankfully the evergreen trees remained resolutely bedecked with their needles, that they were not prepared to relinquish, so there were bursts of green still visible all over the countryside. The rich golds and reds of autumn were all but a fleeting memory, as winter had stolen their beauty away with her treacherous icy hands. The Carter Barron property at one time in the 1800s had been a vast estate that had owned hundreds and hundreds of acres of property, but over the years pieces of the land had been sold off bit by bit. But the farmhouse still stood on 15 acres of land, boasting ponds and wood groves of trees, and was situated on the edge of a sequestered country road, surrounded by a pretty woodland oasis of magnificent lofty trees. So you always felt as if you were living in the middle of nowhere, and the family enjoyed the feeling of being snugly upholstered by the generous arms of the natural world. Sunday morning breakfasts were the very best in the Carter Barron household, where you could smell crisp bacon and sizzling sausages, intermingled with freshly brewed coffee. The normally congenial atmosphere and mood around the long wooden kitchen table was happy and cheery, full of pleasant chatter. Mrs. Carter Barron would cook up a storm, with eggs, bacon, mushrooms, beans, hash browns and waffles. And today, like every other Sunday, was no different. The smells in the cosy kitchen were enough to make anyone with an appetite drool, most especially their two rather overweight pugs, Chaucer and Flamingo, who were scavenging the flagstone floor under the table with noses pinned, watching Aaron's hands very carefully, as he was the soft-hearted member of the household that would steal away a few scraps under the table when no one was looking. Chaucer thought it was rather a good idea to always remind Aaron of his presence under the table, so that Aaron wouldn't overlook the importance of giving the pug a few scraps here and there. So he began to paw Aaron. Aaron acknowledged his paw, giving him a surreptitious stroke with his hands, hoping with all his heart that his mother was not watching him with the evil eye. Mrs. Carter Barron despised him feeding the dogs under the table, and was constantly chastising him for teaching the dogs bad manners by encouraging them to beg. But Aaron never listened. Kim's brother pulled a face, eyeing his sister through narrowing brown eyes. "Are you so dim, Kim?" he said tactlessly, attacking his pork sausage with a fork and popping a corner into his mouth, and chewing it rambunctiously with appreciative smacking sounds with his lips. The sausage was delicious, moist and tender, melting in the mouth. Aaron was blunt, to the point, never gentle with his words. He believed in being straightforward to the point of rudeness. It didn't do to wrap people up in cotton wool and tell them what they wanted to hear, least of all his sister Kim, who could live in her own delusional world if she liked, choosing to see what she wanted to see, which was very convenient. But as far as Aaron was concerned, throughout their childhood, Kim had always had a tendency to be whimsically naive like that. And the truth could be cruel, brutal, and very cutting, much like the winter weather, but it needed to be told. "What Dad is saying is there lots of pretty girls in Boston. Sorry, but it's true, Kim." "I'm not saying you're not pretty, Kimmy, because you are," he said hurriedly, trying to make amends for himself. "But maybe Ethan is having the time of his life, like a kid in a candy shop, spoilt for choice. And let's just say the Kim flavour in the candy is too familiar to him. I mean, you've been together for a long time. Maybe he's got curious about other candies, if you get my drift." "That is uncalled for, Aaron," said Mrs. Carter Barron, snapping at her son and giving him a warning glare to shut him up for being so abrasive and shamelessly scratchy, like sandpaper, with his words. "Don't you talk to your sister like that, Aaron. You're being incredibly unkind in your suggestions. Why do you always have to be so tactless? There are more subtle ways to get your message across than saying something like that. Your sister is incredibly pretty."
I never said she wasn't, Mum. But I'm telling her the truth. Let's not kid. I know that Ethan has got a wandering eye. He always has and always will. But Kim, she refuses to see it. She's in denial. You shouldn't sugarcoat everything for Kim, Mum. She's been in denial about Ethan since they started dating. But everyone knows what he's like. My bet is that he hasn't been faithful to her even during their relationship. But he's way too clever to get caught. The truth speaks for itself. Ethan only cares about Ethan. Isn't it obvious, if he's blocking all her calls, that he's inadvertently too much of a schmuck to actually break up with her decently like a normal civilized human being would? He's such a jerk, that boy. I'm sorry, sis, but don't waste your time worrying about him. That dude ain't worrying about you. My bet is he's living the high life in Boston. You deserve better than him, Kimmy. Forget about him. Let him go chasing after those girls that don't hold a candle to you. And I'm not saying that to butter you up, sis, because it's true. Your brother's absolutely right, sweetheart, said Mrs. Carter Barrell soberly. Ethan doesn't appear to be thinking of you at all. If he was, I'm in absolutely no doubt he'd have contacted you by now. But he hasn't, has he? I mean, if there is something wrong with his cell phone, as you claim, sweetheart, I would have thought he'd have bought another one by now, or borrowed somebody else's. Every student relies on a cell phone these days. They can't possibly be without one. So it speaks volumes to me that he hasn't been in touch with you, Kim. You can do so much better than him. I've always thought he was. You always thought Ethan was what, Mum? Spit it out, said Kim, glaring at her mother defiantly. Her mother's face reddened. She began to focus on the egg she was eating. I don't know, Kim. I just never got the sense that he was desperately loyal or reliable, that's all. I don't like saying unkind things about people, but you're going to anyway, aren't you? Be mean about Ethan. I can't believe you're all conspiring against me, said Kim indignantly. We're not conspiring against you, sweetheart. Where on earth do you get that idea from? We're only saying that we don't think you should invest too much in Ethan, that's all. But I love him, Kim protested. He's promised that once he's got a degree, we'll be married and have lots of kids together. Aaron snorted sarcastically, almost choking on the waffle he was eating. Ha! You believe that, do you, Kim? Chance will be a fine thing. If I know Ethan, he wants to feather his life with some cushy upholstering. And it's not you, Kim. Ethan is fiercely ambitious. He'll find a rich girl in Boston and marry her. He won't be interested in you, Kimmy. I'm not setting out to hurt you, but I know how dudes like him think. I mean, he's blocked all your calls, not responded to your messages. In my book, he's telling you it's over between the two of you. The sooner you accept it, Kimmy, the better. Do not live in the clouds, sis. Get real. It's over between the two of you. You need to read between the lines. I'm not living in the clouds, Aaron. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're making out that Ethan is a gold digger. He's not like that. He loves me. Mrs. Carter Barrell put a consolatory hand on her daughter's and gave it a tight squeeze. But in disgust, Kim pulled it away from her. Your brother makes a good point, dear. It would be wise for you to listen. If Ethan is avoiding your phone calls, maybe he's trying to break things off with you. Not very subtly, I might add. But is it really a bad thing? I don't think so. Let him do his thing in BU. And if you two are meant to be together, one day things will pan out. Let him sow his wild oats for the time being. Find out what he wants in his life. And if it's you he wants, Kimmy, he'll come back to you. Ethan is young, with hormones running wild all over the place. He's likely to be a wee bit self-centred at the moment, but I'm sure he will grow out of his juvenile behaviour in due course, when he becomes a man. But right now he's on the cusp of manhood, is he not? With a lot of maturing to do, like a wine in the cellar that gets better with age.
Kim's face grew as red as a field of poppies. Her lips twitched furiously. She gave her mother a devilish stare, as if warning her to say anything else derogatory about her boyfriend, and she'd kill her.
I can't believe you're talking about Ethan like this. You're so condescending. He's not a little kid, failing to decide what donut he wants to eat at the bakery. Ethan loves me. It's me he wants to be with. We've discussed marriage and how many babies we're going to have together. He wouldn't do that if he wasn't serious. You don't know him like I do.
Aaron made another face at his sister, waving his hand across her face like a flag.
Wake up, Kim. Smell the coffee. Ethan is not being faithful to you. Move on, will you? Get over it. Find someone who will be faithful and treat you right.
Kim gave Aaron a thorny look.
How dare you talk to me like that? Maybe someone stole Ethan's cell phone. A snatch and grab. It happens, you know. Perhaps he hasn't been able to get in touch, that's all. Maybe the person who stole his cell phone is blocking all my calls. Maybe he's been incredibly busy at university and hasn't found a moment to phone me. It happens. I'm going to go to Boston to find out exactly what's going on. I've saved lots of money. I can stay in a bed and breakfast or something, or even book a hotel, a posh one for a couple of days or so, and treat myself. But I'm not going to sit back like a lemon and do absolutely nothing like you suggest. I need to find out what the hell is going on. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why he has not been in touch. You are all grasping at straws. You don't know Ethan like I do, and I know he would never ever cheat on me. You've got him horribly wrong. Maybe something upset him, and he doesn't want to talk to anyone, even me. He gets like that at times when he's upset. If something is grieving his heart, I need to be there for him. He can be very sensitive.
Darling, said Mrs. Carter-Barrell, pouring orange juice into a glass, and gingerly looking at her daughter's misted eyes, that were beginning to brim over with indignant tears.
If it makes you feel better, Kim, who am I to stop you doing anything you want to do? If you want to go to Boston to seek Ethan out, by all means be my guest. I'm just worried that going there is going to break your heart. I'm of the opinion, much like your father, that Ethan has deliberately cut any line of communication with you on purpose. I believe he just doesn't want to speak to you. I'm sorry, dear. I know it hurts. I'm being as cold and cruel with my words as your brother has, but I don't want you to end up with a broken heart. I'm so terribly afraid if you go to Boston you'll end up just like that. Sometimes, you know, it's best to let it all go. Knowing the truth is overrated, my dear. It's not all it's cracked out to be. Your mother's right, dear, said Mr. Carter-Barrell soberly. When I was your age, I had a very huge crush on a young lady, but I was bashfully reticent, terribly afraid to ask her out. But I would imagine us being together. I thought about it often enough, and then one day I went marching to this young lady's front door. I was going to conquer my fears and ask her out, but before I even got to the door, there she was, kissing Harris Fletcher passionately on the doorstep. I walked away, my heart a deflated wildflower. I felt as if all my hopes and dreams had been expunged in one breath. It was brutal. Then one day that lovely young lady agreed to go out with me, he said, looking besottedly at their mother and taking her hand in his, and I never looked back. What I'm saying, Kimmy, is that maybe when you get to Boston, you could experience what I did back then, and I would not wish that on my worst enemy. When your mother was dating someone else, it killed me, and that's not going to be easy to digest. It will be like swallowing a lump of coal, and I don't want that for you, Kimmy," he said, looking at his daughter affectionately. "Don't put yourself in the shark's net so needlessly. It's not a good idea. You could end up getting bitten." Kim looked outraged at her parents and her brother Aaron. Why could they not understand and comprehend that Ethan was a loyal, devoted young man? They were painting him in a grossly unfair, unreasonable light. She looked at them with a bewildered frustration in her green eyes that burnt with fury. "You all think Ethan is with someone else, don't you? You all think he's having an affair. Haven't you listened to a word I'm saying? We love each other. When he's finished at BU, we're going to get married. We've discussed it all. How many times do I have to tell you that? He told me that no other woman will ever interest him like I do. He wouldn't say those things for nothing if he didn't mean them." "If you say so, dear," said Mrs. Carter-Barrell, holding her husband's gaze, as if the two of them were sharing a private moment together, while her brother Aaron made a funny noise at the back of his throat and rolled his eyes in the back of his head, and proceeded to throw a couple of pieces of bacon to two delighted pugs under the table that were squirming with abject delight. "Oh, Aaron, I wish you wouldn't do that," said Mrs. Carter-Barron, looking heartily annoyed. "When will you ever learn not to feed Chaucer and Flamingo under the table? Those two pugs are fat enough. They're roly-polies. It's not good to make them beg under the table like that. You're teaching them very bad habits." Kim pushed her plate of food towards Aaron. "Give the pugs my breakfast. I'm suddenly not hungry at all. I've lost my appetite. I guess it's the company I'm keeping." "Don't be like that, Kim," said Mrs. Carter-Barron. "Please eat a little, dear. I don't want you not to eat anything. I know you love your waffles." "Don't be like what, Mum?" asked Kim. "If you think I'm going to sit here eating breakfast with the likes of you while you all wantingly trash my boyfriend and willingly tear his character apart, you've got another thing coming. I'm not stupid. I know you've never ever liked Ethan." "That's not true, sweetheart. It's not that I've not liked Ethan, but it's just I've never entirely trusted him. You can't blame me for being overprotective, Kim. It's a quintessential mother's right to be like that towards her children. I'm only concerned about you getting your feelings hurt. I love you and only want the very best for you." Kim snorted angrily. "You're so condescending, Mother. It makes me sick. Sitting there bad-mouthing my boyfriend at will, saying all kinds of mean things about him. I hate you all," she said defiantly, storming out of the kitchen like a furious tornado. "Oh dear, that's me, Todorf," said Mrs. Carter-Barron, groaning. "That certainly went well. She's so touchy, isn't she?" "That's because she knows something is wrong," said Aaron. "She's being very defensive, making all kinds of excuses for Ethan. Why he's not been in touch. Maybe it's good if she goes to Boston. She'll have a nasty wake-up call, and it won't hurt her to learn the truth." Mrs. Carter-Barron sighed, putting her hand on her heart. "I just can't bear poor Kimmy getting hurt like this. It breaks my heart." "It would seem," said Mr. Carter-Barron, "that we can't keep wrapping our daughter up in cotton wool. Getting hurt is a passage of life that touches us all in one way or another. Kim is going to need to face those tumultuous storms, and it will be the making of her, I'm sure. It'll help her to grow up." Kim was furious with her family. Stuff them, she thought. They were all completely clueless and had no comprehension of what they were talking about. She would show her entire family that they had got Ethan horribly wrong. She couldn't wait for them to have eggs splashed all over their faces when she returned to North Carolina, with a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why Ethan had failed to get in touch. Kim had taken a flight to Boston, and since she had arrived in the big city on this Friday morning, she had felt more than a little intimidated, rather like a fish out of water, trying to find her bearings. Boston, known to some as the Hub or even Beantown, and the Athens of America, is the largest city in Massachusetts and New England, and is the only state capital with an oceanic coastline. It is rich in culture and full of stunning historic buildings, steeped in a vibrant history. It boasts interesting shops, excellent restaurants, fabulous parks, student bicycles whizzing here and there, weaving between the traffic with a purposeful intent, or sometimes sticking to a network of bicycle lanes. The city possesses that classic small-town feel about it, despite being such a large metropolis. Kim noticed that there was a youthful ambience that hung around Boston like an illustrious choker chain of pearls, that keeps the city both current and hip. Everywhere you went, she noticed the tinkle of ebullient laughter as students giggled among their peers, many warming their gloved hands against steaming cups of piping hot coffee. When Kim walked down the street, hugging her parka close to her body to keep out the winter chill, as the weather was rebelliously cold, she was greeted to the lingering, pleasing aroma of coffee beans, cinnamon buns, and confectionery from a nearby bakery cum coffee shop. To make matters worse, one student came out of a bakery with a piping hot cinnamon bun in her hand that dribbled with warm icing, that she stuffed decadently into her mouth with glee, and the insanely delicious smell of butter and cinnamon made Kim's stomach lurch with hunger. But she couldn't follow her stomach's distracted leanings. She had an important job to do here in Boston, and that was to find the whereabouts of her elusive boyfriend Ethan. The neighborhoods in Boston were fringed by tall, lofty, sculptural-looking trees that serenaded the pavements grandly, and lightly looked spectacular during the summer months, when everything was vibrantly green. But right now, with the approaching winter, some of that verdant resplendence had been stolen, much like it had been done back in her hometown. Kim arrived in Boston with a single suitcase, not containing very much. She had decided to treat herself by staying at a lavish, rather ornate hotel, with an old-world, grandiose charm about it, where she'd been given a 30% discount, as she was booking the hotel out of season, and so she had benefited from a great deal. "You're so lucky," said the young, pretty receptionist behind the hotel reception desk, who gave her a goofy grin. "You're staying in one of the finer luxury suites, and you're getting it for a song," she said ebulliently, trying to sound professional, but instead she appeared like an excited kid who'd received her Christmas stocking. She was obviously new around there, and had not worked in the hotel business for very long. "It's a bargain," she said. "Enjoy your suite. It's number 312, she said, handing Kim a keycard. The attentive, very smartly dressed porter had carefully placed Kim's unassuming, rather bland-looking, unremarkable suitcase in his grandiose golden trolley, and wheeled it up with her in the lift to her hotel suite. She felt like a millionaire. She placed her keycard in the door, and found herself staring in awe at the most stunning, lavishly appointed hotel suite she'd ever seen, with the most massive bed dappled in sumptuous linens, and elegantly swathed in luxurious bed coverings, and decorated with a pretty confetti of rose petals, and had a pair of fluffy white towels on the end of the bed shaped into swans. The sumptuous room overlooked exquisite views onto an Italian courtyard and a large swimming pool with an impressive sculptural fountain. There were generous bowls of exotic fruit and a bottle of free French champagne presented to her on the glass wrought-iron coffee table, with a complimentary slip from the hotel, encouraging her to enjoy her stay in Boston and to be sure to book with them again. She shuddered with delight, giving the porter an extravagant tip. I mean, she couldn't help herself, could she? It seemed most fitting to be overly generous in an environment like this. And besides, it didn't do any harm to pretend she was loaded for this weekend, where no expense would be spared. She could imagine Ethan's delighted face when she showed him the glorious, extravagant deluxe hotel suite she'd booked for the two of them. It would be so romantic, enjoying this luxuriously plush space together. Just the two of them. How she had missed him so much, and she was certain he had a very good explanation as to why he had not been in touch with her for quite a while, and seemingly blocked all her frantic calls. They could enjoy this weekend together, seeing the sights of Boston, and wallowing in the lap of luxury, lackadaisically ordering room service, and drinking back glasses of French champagne. I mean, what could be better than that? Ethan would be thrilled, absolutely thrilled. Kim had never stayed in such a palatial, immodest hotel before, but as far as she was concerned, it was worth every single penny. I mean, from time to time, everybody deserved a little pampering and spoiling, did they not? The grandiose old-fashioned hotel delivered on all its fantastical promises. It boasted grand, sweeping marble floors, plush designer carpets, luxury furnishings, old-world antiques, large exquisite Ming-style vases, displaying fabulously opulent and extravagant flower arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and very attentive staff that would lightly swing on the chandeliers for you, if needs must. Kim left the hotel very early that morning, moments after she'd checked in, when a winter frost had dominated all the stone-washed grass and covered everything in an icy blanket. Kim was dropped off by a taxi in a neighbourhood where all the Victorian houses were clustered tightly together, like little orphans trying to keep warm, because the chill of the morning seemed to be smoking through the grass and trees in a vaporous mist. Given it was very early in the morning, the languishing university town was suitably purged of all its residents, and appeared to be locked under a contented, complacent slumber. It would seem only one lone jogger, who clearly had lost leave of her senses, being up and about this early, seemed to share the street with Kim and her taxicab. It would seem the jogger and the taxi rudely disturbed the neighbourhood's serene, peaceful tranquillity. The jogger's running shoes pounded the asphalt vigorously, as she nimbly jolted up and down in a rhythmic bobbing motion, down the street, looking as if she heartily regretted having ever got up out of bed that morning, as she breathed out white puffs of cold icy air. There were bicycles scattered absolutely everywhere you cared to look, chained to railings and trees, and some of the old Victorian houses looked like dilapidated squatters, as if their unscrupulous landlords that owned these homes strove to spend the bare minimum on their investments, to maximise their greedy profits, as this was a more affordable Boston neighbourhood, where students were renting accommodation. Once Gemma had abandoned her taxi and paid him well, she was hit with an unwelcome blast of icy cold air, and with a vigorous walking pace she found number 56. This must be it, she thought, studying the house with a critical gaze. There were a couple of old, very well-used bicycles tethered to some black wrought-iron railings outside the property. At one time the old Victorian house had probably looked spectacular in its heyday, but even in the soft, forgiving shadows of the early morning that dappled the house in a prism of pretty light, it was begging for attention, that was clear to see. It looked as if it was heaving and groaning with exhaustion, longing for a makeover long since overdue. There was peeling paint on the outer wall, and window frames that were beginning to crack on the edges. Kim gingerly, with a vacillating, rather awkward hesitancy, made her way through the small wrought-iron gates that squeaked noisily behind her as she opened them. She realised her early fortuitous arrival at the premises might not exactly be warmly received, for she could sense the mellow quietness of the neighbourhood, as not even a dog's intrusive barks rudely disturbed the peaceful calm. She climbed up some rather cracked-looking flagstone steps, towards the mottled, badly eaten front door, that to her astonishment appeared to be ajar. Did nobody care about security around here, she wondered? Anyone could waltz through the door and hold everyone to ransom. But then perhaps poor university students weren't exactly the target of an aspiring thief. Still, it wasn't wise to be so insouciant about your own personal safety. Kim was surprised to find that her own heart was swinging rather violently in her chest, like a spirited pendulum, with a nervous, swaggering energy. And she had a profound guilty sense that she should not be here, as if a still, small voice whispered in the back of her head that she shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come. She unabashedly shook off her lingering doubts, like a shaggy dog might shake the water from his coat after a dip in the lake. She had every right to be here, she told herself firmly. Ethan had not been in touch with her, and she needed to find out why. The little voice in her head did not share her opinion, and seemed to refuse to go away, as it tugged at her guts like pulling the bells at a church, and the words were becoming increasingly insistent, telling her that she should go home at once. Go home! Go home! Go home! Kim muted the voices in her head angrily, almost as if switching down the dial of an annoying radio signal that wouldn't shut up with its loud, obnoxious, booming, noisy music. And when her mind stilled, she felt significantly better. She composed herself, took in a deep breath, and proceeded along her way. She pushed open the half-ajar door, that, much like the wrought-iron gates on the outside of the property, creaked and groaned in agony, as if by merely touching them she was making them gasp out in pain. She noticed an old sweeping staircase in a narrow, dark, dingy passageway, covered in a manky carpet, that looked like it was a fake replica of a grand equivalent. It trailed up in one ribbon of threadbare carpet to meet up with the second and third floors of the property. She knocked on the door, even though she was inside the house, but perceived it was the polite thing to do, and a young student, with her hair swept away in a messy blonde ponytail, came to the door, looking a sorry sight, blary-eyed, as if she was recovering from a hangover from the previous night. The girl gave Kim a watery, apologetic smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking Kim up and down. "I can't believe you're up this early," she said, almost looking impressed. "I'm looking for Ethan," said Kim. "I know it's early, but I really need to see him. He does live here, does he not? He did assure me that this was his address in Boston." "Ethan sure does live here," said the girl with a giggle. "We had a bit of a party last night. We all got a bit bladdered, I'm afraid," she said apologetically. "You must be Trish, his sister," she said, stepping away to guide Kim into the house. So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.